Halloween was always a big deal in our neighborhood. The streets would be filled with kids in costumes, their laughter echoing as they went door to door collecting candy. That night started off like any other. Pumpkins on doorsteps, houses decorated with cobwebs and skeletons, and the unmistakable buzz of excitement in the air. I had just finished handing out candy to a group of kids when I noticed something strange. It had been nearly 10 minutes since the last group of trick-or-treaters had come by, which was unusual for our neighborhood. I figured maybe the kids were gathering at one of the bigger houses, the ones that handed out the full-size candy bars. But then I got a text from my neighbor, Sarah. "Are your kids still out?" she asked. "Mine haven't come back, and I'm getting worried." My heart skipped a beat. My two kids, along with Sarah's and a few others from the neighborhood, had gone out together. They were supposed to be back by now. I texted back, telling her they weren't home yet either, and that I was going to go out and look for them. I grabbed a flashlight and headed out. The streets were eerily quiet now, the excitement of earlier in the evening completely gone. I knocked on a few doors, asking if anyone had seen the kids, but no one had. The other parents had started to gather, all of them looking just as panicked as I felt. As we searched, the atmosphere grew more tense. There was no sign of the kids, no laughter or running footsteps, just silence. Then, one by one, the parents started getting messages on their phones. Each one was the same, a text from an unknown number with a message that sent chills down my spine. "If you want your children back, you know what to do." Panic set in among us. We didn't understand what the messages meant. Some parents tried calling the police, but the lines were jammed. Others attempted to trace the number, but it was unlisted. It was as if the sender didn't exist. As we gathered at Sarah's house, trying to figure out what to do next, one of the older neighbors, Mr. Henderson, spoke up. His voice was shaky, his face pale. He said that years ago, before most of us had moved in, there had been an incident. A group of kids had gone missing on Halloween night, and they were never found. The neighborhood had kept it quiet, buried it, trying to forget. But now, it seemed like whatever had taken those children was back. There was a heavy silence as we processed what he said. Could it be true? Had something from the past returned to take our children? The messages continued to come, each one more cryptic and threatening than the last. It was clear that we had to confront whatever was behind this if we wanted our kids back. We returned to the area where the children had last been seen, near an old, abandoned house at the edge of the neighborhood. It was a place we had all warned our kids to stay away from, but now it seemed like the only place left to look. The house was dark and foreboding, its windows shattered, and the door hanging off its hinges. As we approached, the air grew colder, and a sense of dread settled over us. We knew we were about to face something we didn't understand, something dangerous. But we had no choice. Our kids' lives were at stake. Inside the house, we found a hidden room beneath the floorboards, filled with old, decaying toys and faded photographs of children from decades ago. It was clear this place had a dark history, one that had been ignored for far too long. In the center of the room was a box, and inside it, we found a piece of paper with a single word written on it: sacrifice. We realized then what the messages had meant. This entity, whatever it was, demanded something in return for the children. A life for a life. We were faced with an impossible choice, one that no parent should ever have to make. But in the end, someone had to make it. When we finally made our decision, the house seemed to come alive with a cold wind, and the children reappeared in the street, unharmed but confused. They had no memory of what had happened, but the weight of our choice hung heavily over us. We returned to our homes, but the neighborhood was never the same. We had confronted the darkness that had long been buried, but the cost was too great. And as Halloween came to an end, I knew that the quiet, suburban streets would always hold a shadow, a reminder of the night our children vanished and the secrets we uncovered to bring them back. The invitation arrived in a sleek black envelope, sealed with a wax stamp bearing an intricate symbol that none of us recognized. It was elegant and mysterious, and the curiosity it sparked was too strong to ignore. The invitation promised an exclusive Halloween party at an old, secluded mansion on the outskirts of town, a place I'd heard about but never visited. The catch? I had no idea who sent it. When I arrived at the mansion, it was just as grand and eerie as I'd imagined, towering over the landscape like a sentinel of the past. The full moon cast long shadows across the gravel driveway, and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of music and laughter. As I stepped inside, I realized I wasn't alone. There were others, strangers who seemed just as puzzled as I was. We exchanged wary glances, each of us wondering who the others were and why we had been invited. The party was in full swing, with dim lighting, antique furniture, and decorations that gave the place an air of timeless elegance. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, but something felt off. The faces around me were unfamiliar, and there was an undercurrent of unease that none of us could quite place. The host was nowhere to be seen, and the mansion, though stunning, had an unsettling quality. Portraits lined the walls, their eyes following us as we moved from room to room. The music played on, but there was no band, no source that we could find. It was as if the house itself was alive, guiding us through its halls. As the night wore on, we began to talk, trying to piece together how we were connected. It didn't take long for us to realize that we shared a common thread. Each of us had a dark secret, something we had buried deep in our pasts. The mansion, it seemed, was more than just a location. It was a mirror, reflecting the darkest parts of our souls. Then, the doors locked. Panic set in as we tried to escape, but there was no way out. The windows were sealed, and the once inviting mansion had become a prison. The lights flickered, plunging us into darkness. When they came back on, one of the guests was missing. In their place was a note written in the same elegant script as the invitation. It read, "One by one, your sins will come to light. Only the pure will survive." Fear gripped us as we realized what was happening. The mansion was playing a game, forcing us to confront the secrets we had tried to hide. Each room we entered revealed more about our pasts, and as we moved deeper into the mansion, the stakes grew higher. One by one, the guests were taken, each forced to face the truth of their darkest deeds. The house seemed to revel in our terror, twisting and shifting as if it was feeding on our fear. The more we struggled, the more it toyed with us, leading us through a maze of our own making. In the end, only a few of us remained. We gathered in the grand ballroom where the final revelation awaited us. The host, who had been watching from the shadows all along, stepped forward. It was then that we recognized the face, an amalgamation of all those we had wronged, a living embodiment of our guilt and shame. The host revealed the true purpose of the party. We weren't just here by chance, we were being judged, and the mansion was the executioner. The invitation had been a summons, a call to account for the sins of our pasts. Some of us had been found wanting, and they had paid the ultimate price. As the clock struck midnight, the host offered a final choice: face our darkest secrets and atone, or remain trapped in the mansion forever, consumed by our guilt. Those of us who chose to confront our pasts were spared, but the memory of that night would haunt us forever. When I finally stepped out into the cold night air, the mansion behind me seemed to shrink into the darkness, as if it had never been there at all. The invitation had brought me face to face with my darkest self, and though I had survived, I knew that part of me would never leave that place. The mansion had taken something from me, something I could never get back. The Harvest Festival in the village of Raven's Hollow had always been a time of celebration. Every year, as the crops were gathered and the leaves turned golden, the villagers would come together to mark the end of the harvest season. The festival was a blend of old traditions and communal joy, with dancing, feasting, and rituals that had been passed down for generations. But this year, something was different. The festival coincided with a rare blood moon, casting an eerie red glow over the village. The air felt heavier, charged with a strange energy that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My girlfriend and I had only recently moved to Raven's Hollow, drawn by its charm and the promise of a quiet life. We were excited to experience the festival for the first time, but as the night wore on, our excitement turned to unease. It started with the villagers. People we had met in passing, kind, welcoming faces, began to act strangely. Their smiles were too wide, their laughter too loud, and there was a look in their eyes that I couldn't quite place. It was as if they were being driven by something beyond themselves, an unseen force that compelled them to keep the festivities going, despite the unsettling atmosphere. As the night deepened, the rituals took on a darker tone. What had started as innocent games and dances became more intense, almost frenzied. The villagers moved with a purpose that felt unnatural, their movements synchronized in a way that made my skin crawl. The chants, which had once sounded like a celebration, now echoed through the night with a sinister edge. I noticed my girlfriend's discomfort growing, mirroring my own. We exchanged nervous glances, silently agreeing that something was very wrong. We decided to leave the main square and explore the village, hoping to find some explanation for the bizarre turn of events. As we walked, the sounds of the festival faded into the distance, replaced by an oppressive silence that hung over the village like a shroud. That's when we stumbled upon the old church at the edge of the village, a place we had been told was the heart of the community's spiritual life. But tonight, it seemed abandoned, the doors slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. We hesitated, then pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The interior was dimly lit by candles placed haphazardly along the walls. The air was thick with the smell of incense, almost choking in its intensity. At the far end of the room, where the altar should have been, we saw something that made our blood run cold. An elaborate setup was being prepared, an altar of sorts, but not for worship. It was a place of sacrifice. As we crept closer, the details became clear. The altar was stained with something dark, and the symbols carved into its surface were unlike anything we had ever seen. They were ancient, malevolent, and they pulsed with a life of their own under the glow of the blood moon. Surrounding the altar were villagers, their expressions blank, their eyes fixed on the scene with a kind of detached reverence. Before we could react, we heard footsteps behind us. We turned to see the village elder, a man who had always greeted us with warmth and kindness, now wearing an expression that sent chills down my spine. He told us, with a voice devoid of emotion, that the festival was more than just a celebration. It was a ritual, one that had been performed for centuries to ensure the village's survival. Under the blood moon, the veil between worlds was thin, and the harvest had to be secured not just with hard work, but with a blood sacrifice. The villagers' strange behavior, the escalating intensity of the rituals, it all made sense now. They were preparing for the culmination of the festival, the final act that would guarantee their safety for another year. We were the outsiders, the newcomers, and we had been brought here for a reason. As the elder explained the truth, the villagers began to close in around us, their expressions unreadable, their intentions clear. Panic surged through us, and we bolted for the door, pushing past the villagers who seemed to move in slow motion. We ran through the village, the blood moon lighting our path as we made our way to the edge of Raven's Hollow. The sounds of the festival, now more like a ritualistic chant, followed us, growing fainter as we reached the cover of the forest. We didn't stop running until the village was far behind us, and the blood moon had begun to sink below the horizon. The next day, when we tried to speak of what we had seen, No one would believe us. The village was back to its serene, welcoming self, and the harvest festival was spoken of as a success. But we knew the truth. Raven's Hollow was a place of dark traditions, where the harvest wasn't just reaped from the fields, but from the blood of those who were unlucky enough to be caught under the blood moon's gaze. We left the village soon after, but the memory of that night, of the harvest festival's true purpose, will haunt us forever.